Hey, how's it going? I'm Nick Gaska and welcome back to I Could Do That DIY for another doll repaint video. Today we're getting a little weird and a little magical. So yeah, let's get into it. For today's custom doll we're using this elephant figurine I bought on Amazon. I think it looks pretty great. Alright, cool. So for the concept of this doll I had to ask myself, what would an elephant want to be if it was a custom doll? And after a lot of soul searching, I came to the conclusion that an elephant would most definitely want to be a magical girl. With so many animes and mangas out there, who doesn't love a magical girl? I personally love magical girls. I love all their weapons and outfits and all the little details. So many ruffles and bows. I love it. So that's definitely what we need to do today. Alright, let's get started. So since the elephant is pretty large, for the body today we'll be using this made to move Barbie. Cool. It should look something like this. Awesome. Now let's harvest some body parts and cut off this elephant's head. I'll be doing it with my trusty Dremel. After I cut the elephant head off the body, I'm going to refine the edge a little bit more with my Dremel tool. So this looks pretty good. It should fit like that. Cool, but before I glue these two together, I think it would be a good idea to dye the body. But I did not have synthetic dye, so in the end the only thing that actually took the color were the joints. Oh well, not everything works out. Now let's glue the elephant head to the body. I'm just going to use some super glue, add it to the elephant head, and then press the two together. After the glue's all dry, I'm going to start working on the back of the head. We're going to form the back of the head with some armature wire and some tinfoil and some epoxy sculpt. Let's start by putting in the wires. I'm going to heat up the end of the wire with a lighter, and then stick it through. Twist it to secure. Bend it upward. Stick it in the head again, and then twist again. I'll add 2 more wires horizontally. But because the head's so heavy, it's dipping forward. To counterweight that, I'm going to add some washers inside the head. I'm just looping around some washers around some wire. And then securing that wire inside the frame. I'll do it twice to make sure it has enough weight. Alright, now let's add the tinfoil. I'm just going to cut a rough shape, round the bottom, and then glue it on with some super glue. Should look something like this when I'm all done. Cool. Now let's cover the back with some epoxy sculpt. When you're mixing the epoxy sculpt, make sure to wear gloves. During the mixing stage is when it's the most toxic and when it can irritate your skin the most. I'm going to continue to add epoxy sculpt to the back until it looks more like a head. I'll smooth things out with water and then add some texture with some tinfoil. Alright, awesome, that looks great so far. Now let's add some wrinkles with this palette knife. After that, to balance out her proportions a little bit more since her head is giant, we're going to be adding a little bit more volume to her bust. So again, I'm just adding some epoxy sculpt and smoothing it out with some water. This time I'm using a Q-tip to help smooth things out. And while that was drying, I realized the top half is getting a little too heavy. I think I need to reconnect the torso. So I'm going to glue it off screen, and then add some epoxy sculpt to cover up the seam. After I smooth everything out with some water, I'm going to let it cure for 24 hours off screen. I'll do a little sanding just to blend it in, but before I paint, I think I should work on the outfit. Here's the sketch of the outfit we'll be making today. It's very Amelia from ReZero. I'm totally obsessed with this. Yeah. So we're doing lots of tones of purple. We have some ribbon with some iridescent edging. 3 tones of purple cotton. We have a deep purple, a lavender, and white. We're going to start by draping the bodice. I'll be using a pair of scissors, some muslin, and a pen. Cool. Oh, and also this clear ruler. If you don't have one, I highly recommend getting one. Let's just draw out some grain lines and cut some fabric. This will be for the bodice. I'll do some more lines for the cup. Now let's start draping. I'll cut off some excess off the center front and then tape it to the body. I'll continue to drape the fabric to the body and mark the pattern. I'll add some slashes to the fabric to help fit it to the body. Pull it towards the back and continue marking. After that's all marked out, I'll tape it to secure it and then move on to the cup. I'll start by taping the top of the piece to the body and then draping around the bust and marking as I go. Then I'll use the excess to create a dart and mark that out as well. And because I don't like to make things easy on myself, I decided to make a 3-piece cup. So now I'm going to mark out the top piece, take everything off the body, and start working on our paper patterns. So I'll take the muslin and put it underneath the paper. Then I'll trace it, cut everything out, and making sure to label the pieces as I go so I don't get confused on the orientation later on. Then I'll tape everything to another piece of paper and give it a accordant seam allowance off screen. I'll repeat the same process for the bodice piece. Next, I'll work on the pattern piece for the high-low peplum. I'll draw 3 parallel lines to start off. One will be 2 inches away from the top, and then the next one will be 2.5 inches away from that. After that, I'll draw a reference line for the center front, and then we'll angle it out. Then the center back, and then draw a reference point for the bottom. These are our slash marks, so we'll be cutting those later on. I think the angle on the bottom is a little too straight, so we're going to make it a little bit more curved. More curved. Next, let's cut out the pattern piece. Then we'll cut these slash marks to give the bottom a little bit more volume. Tape it to the paper and then reconnect the bottom line. Then we'll give everything according to seam allowance. I'm going to end up cutting this off later on and just have the seam allowance at the top. Next, I'll work on the pattern for her little vest thingy. I'll use the bodice pattern as a reference and trace it. I'll adjust it to the correct shape and then give it a little bit more ease so we can fit over top of the dress. Next, I'll work on the peplum for that. I'll trace the edge of a spray paint cap and make a circle. Then I'll make another circle around that, do a couple more reference lines, fold it in half, and then draw out the shape for my peplum. After I draw out the shape, I'll add a 1/4 inch seam allowance to the waist. After that, we'll work on the pattern for the underskirt. It's another circle within a circle that's 2 inches wide. I'll cut it out and then fold it in half. After that, we'll cut out the center and then make the center back opening. The next pattern we'll be working on is the sleeve. I'm drawing a set of parallel lines that are 2 inches apart. I'm folding in half and making a line 2 inches away from the edge and then 1 inch away from the edge. Then I'm going to draw out the shape of my sleeve, add my seam allowance, and then cut it out. I'll do the same process for the underlayer of the sleeve, it'll just be a different shape and the points will be offset. Now I'm working on the pattern for the boot. I'm going to trace the silhouette of the foot and the leg to get the general shape, give it a little bit of ease, and angle the top. Then I'll cut it out, give it a little test fit, looks pretty good, and do the pattern of the sole by tracing the foot. And that'll do it for the patterns. Let's go back to working on the doll. We're going to start out by basing out the body so it's all one color. I'm going to be using Tamiya Color for Plastics TS14 in black. Now that everything's all one color, I'm going to bust out my acrylic paints. Using black, white, and a little bit of brown, I'm doing 3 different tones of gray. I'll do a darker base tone, dry brush on a lighter tone, and then stipple in the grayish brown at the end. This color really helped give some life to the gray. It was looking a little dead. I'm going to paint the tusk with multiple layers of watered down white acrylic paint. And to give the skin a little bit more texture, I'm going to add some darker freckles. This is a mixture of watered down black and dark umber acrylic paint. I'm just dotting it on and blotting off the excess with my finger. Once I'm happy with the paint so far, I'm going to save my work by spraying a layer of Mr. Super Clear as a sealant. Then we're going to move on to pastels. Using my light gray pastel, I'm going to contour the face and the body by highlighting certain areas. I'm using one brush to brush on the pastel and then another brush to blend it out. Now let's work on her eyes. Elephants have a beautiful brown iris color. I'm using my light brown watercolor pencil to color in the eye. I'm going to follow that up with my brown pastel. Next, I'm using my white pastel to highlight the eyelid. After that, I'm going to use my black watercolor pencil to mark in my pupil. To add some blush to the cheek, we're going to use my pink pastel. For the eyeshadow, I'll be using a mixture of a purple pastel and the same pink pastel I used on the cheeks. Alright, now let's add some highlights to the eye with my white watercolor pencil, and then shade the pupil and the top of the eye with my black pastel. On the next layer, I'll continue to build up color and highlight with my pastels and watercolor pencils. Next, I'll add the catch lights to the eyes with my white acrylic paint. Alright, cool, those look pretty good. Next, I'll color in the mouth with my pink paint. To finish off the repaint, I'll do a layer of Mr. Super Clear on the head and do 2 layers of LIQUITEX matte varnish on the body. And while that dries, I'll work on her WORBLA accessories. I'll be making 2 sheets of WORBLA and her boots. I made the pattern for the sheets off screen. I'm going to trace everything onto the WORBLA and then cut it out. Next, I'll use my heat gun to heat up the pieces. Once it's nice and pliable, I'm going to fold it once over. Then I'll use a metal tweezer to help form the shape. I want the 2 sides to remain separated but close at the edge. Cool, this is where the sword goes. Now I'm going to fold over the top tab. And again, I'll use my metal tweezer to keep it open. This will be where I'll connect it to the belt later on. Okay, now let's work on the boots. I wrapped the legs of the doll with plastic wrap and tape off screen. I'm just going to do the same process and heat the WORBLA and then form it around the leg. After that, I'll heat up the sole and then attach it to the rest of the boot. Then I'll add a 1/2 inch mitered stripe to the top of the boot. Now it's time to paint everything white. We're going to start by painting the boots, then the sheath, and then the sword handles white. I forgot to mention that I 3D printed the swords. So yeah, I 3D printed the swords. Then I'm going to paint the blade silver, and the stripe on the boots silver as well. After that, everything I painted white previously gets a coat of dragonfly glaze. This will make it nice and pretty and iridescent. And then of course, because I love glitter, everything I painted silver gets silver glitter glue. I painted the gem on the end of the handle purple off screen. I also gave it a coat of dragonfly glaze as well. Then we're covering the handle with ribbon. I'm using some super glue and then wrapping the ribbon around. Trimming it and then burning the edge. So there's a little paint damage around the neck. We're going to cover that up with some lace. I'm just going to cut it to length and then super glue it on. I'm usually not a fan of gluing things onto dolls, I actually really hate it, but I know I'll never take this outfit off of her, so I'm going to go ahead and glue some things on. After I glue the lace on, we're going to glue a ribbon on. We're going to follow the same process and just add some glue and then add the ribbon. And to finish off the neck detail, we're going to glue a cabochon to the center front. And now for the most labor-intensive part of this custom doll, the sewing. So here's the skirt base. It's going to get 2 layers of scallop lace trim. One along the bottom and then one just above that. Here is the vest. The peplum is going to be gathered into the waist. I cut 2 layers to begin with, but I ended up changing my mind and freight checking the edge and just sewing 1 layer into the waist. Here are the sleeve pieces. They're going to be layered like this. Then I'll sew the top edge, understitch it, sew the undersleeve, and then cinch the top. Next is the main dress. Here are all the bodice pieces. Here are the 3 pieces to the cup, and the 2 separated bodice pieces. After the 2 sides are sewn, we'll be joining them at center front. These are the peplum pieces. I ended up making the same decision that I did for the other peplum and just doing 1 layer and freight checking the edge. I'll start by doing the initial pinning to set myself up for sewing later. Then I'll start the sewing by attaching the scallop lace trim to my base skirt. And you may be wondering, why start there? But that's because my machine was already threaded with white thread. I'm sewing the first layer on, and then pinning on the second layer, and then sewing that as well. It's looking very pretty so far. Now I'm just going to close up the center back seam. After that, I'll add a drawstring tie waist by basting in some white embroidery floss around the waist. Cool, looks pretty good. You can see it end up on the doll in the next scene. Now I'm sewing the center seam on the cup. I'll do the same thing for both sides. Then I'll move on to sewing the sleeve. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm just going to sew the top edge. Just give it a little press with my fingernail, and then understitch it. This helps create a nice sharp crease at the edge. Then I'll sew the underarm seam. And because the cut pieces are so curved, we're going to have to do some hand sewing. I'm hand sewing in the top panel, then I'll fold over the top and glue with some FABRI-TAC glue off screen. After that, I need to hand sew in both cups into the bodice pieces. I'm making sure to press everything as I go. Then I'll join the two bodice pieces together at center front. Next, we'll attach the peplum to the bodice. To do that, we'll gather the top of the two peplum pieces and then sew it to the waist. Like I mentioned earlier, I fray checked the outer edges. Cool, that looks really great so far. Now I need to hem the top and the center back opening. Awesome! Now we're going to sew this onto the doll to reduce bulk in the center back seam. I'll corset the back up with some embroidery floss and 2 needles. Until it looks something like this. Then I'm going to pull it tight, tie a bow, cut the excess, and then glue the ends. I'll put the underskirt on by cinching the waist and tying a bow in the back as well. For the vest, we're going to start by gathering the top peplum edge, then pinning it to the waist and sewing it. It turns out looking something like this. Then I'll pin on the ribbon straps as well as the lining piece. Then I'm going to sew the top edge, stopping to reinforce each strap. After that, I'll cut the excess and add fray check to the cut edge. After it dried, I sewed the sides off screen. Then we're going to turn it right side out and do a stitch in the ditch to secure the lining. Cool, it should look something like this. I'm going to be adding ribbon to the waist as well. But before that, I'm going to press it off screen. Then I'm going to tack down the ribbon to center front, and then add a bow as well. Once I've secured the bow and the ribbon to the waist, we're going to add the sheaths. I'm putting the ribbon through the holes that I made earlier, and then tacking the end of the ribbon to the back of the garment. I'll repeat the process for both sides. And then of course each bow is going to get a cabochon glued to the center. And with that, the vest is complete. Time to add it to the rest of the garment. I'm going to add it to the waist, flip it around and tie the back. I'm going to do a bow and cut the excess later on. Then I'm going to glue the top straps to the back of the neck ribbon. And of course we're going to cover that in another bow. Followed by another cabochon. Time to add the sleeves. I'm going to be cinching up the top of the sleeve with a gathering stitch. Then we're going to put it around the arm and pull it tight. Knot to secure. Then add a bow and of course a cabochon. I'll repeat the same process for the other sleeve off screen. Of course, the boots need bows and cabochons as well. Now let's add some fake eyelashes to the doll. I already measured them to the right size off screen. I'm just going to curve them a little bit, add some glue and stick them on. Once the lashes are dry, we're going to gloss both eyes and the mouth. Now I'm thinking she needs more bows, because who doesn't need more bows? So we're adding a bow to the head. And to tie in the purple on the ends of the swords, we're going to be adding some bracelets. They have a blue-purple iridescent quality. I simply strung some beads on some doubled up thread, wrapped it around the wrist, and tied a knot. Off screen, I worked a lot on this base. I 3D printed a magic circle and cut out a piece of wood and glued the two together. Then I painted the whole thing silver, added a coat of dragonfly glaze, and then finished it off with a coat of silver glitter glue. For the stand part of the stand, we'll be using this metal tube. I'm going to be drilling a hole to combine the two together. But before that, I'm going to show you all my failed attempts at stands that I 3D printed. So she was too heavy for the first one, the second one didn't fit her waist, she was too heavy for the third one, the hook was going to snap, and she didn't fit this one. So I had to make my own stand. My first idea was just to drill a hole in the back like I did on my angel doll. But she kept moving around and I didn't want to secure it with epoxy sculpt. So instead I drilled a hole in the stand, glued the tube into the stand, bent the wire a bunch, and made a crotch stand. It looks something like this. It's kind of a weird design, but it hooks up and then around the front waist to secure it better. But now I have this big hole in the back. Here's a pro tip: if there's a hole that you no longer need, cover it up with a bow. I'm just going to glue the bow on, add a cabochon, and that completes the doll. Now there's only one thing left to do: a doll photo shoot. So here she is, here's the finished result. Oh my god, I'm obsessed with her, she's amazing. I love all the details and all the tones of purple. I think she makes an amazing magical girl. I'm so happy with how she turned out. There's so many little details, and I think this is the most effort I put into an outfit pretty much ever. I would love to hear what you guys think in the comments below. Also, if you have any ideas for projects in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure to like the video if you liked it and subscribe to my channel. There'll definitely be more doll repaints in the future, as well as other custom dolls just like this. But for the rest of the video, just enjoy these awesome photos. Thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!